I never thought owning a quiet piece of farmland would turn me into the target of an entire neighborhood. Mason Walker, 34, had inherited his grandfather's 10-acre ranch just outside the upscale development of Silver Pines Estates. The ranch was his escape. Rows of tomatoes, a rusty red barn, and a stubborn old sheepdog named Cooper. But one Saturday morning, Mason was jolted awake not by birds or tractors, but by the unmistakable sound of dozens of car doors slamming. Still in his flannel pajama pants, Mason walked barefoot onto his porch and froze. His east field, freshly tilled and ready for spring planting, had become a makeshift parking lot. SUVs and sedans lined up in neat rows, tires crushing soil and young shoots beneath them. A woman in a navy blue power suit was directing traffic with the confidence of a general. "Excuse me, what the hell is going on?" Mason shouted, walking into the chaos. The woman turned with a saccharine smile. "Good morning. I'm Vanessa Hartley, president of the Silver Pines HOA. This is just our designated overflow lot for the Spring Golf Invitational." Mason's jaw tightened. "This is my land, and you just parked on the wrong damn ranch." Vanessa Hartley didn't flinch when Mason said the words, "This is my land." Instead, she gave him that plastic smile that HOA presidents must get issued with their clipboards. "Oh, you must be confused," she chirped, waving her tablet. "This parcel was designated for community overflow parking years ago. It's in our HOA bylaws." Mason crossed his arms. "Lady, I've lived on this ranch since I was 12. My grandfather owned it before me. We've never been part of your HOA. This is private property and you're trespassing." She tilted her head like he was a toddler asking why the sky was blue. "Well, the previous board may have had an agreement with your grandfather. I'm sure we can find some paperwork. My grandfather would rather eat gravel than let a bunch of Range Rovers park on his cornfield." That wiped the smile off her face. Behind them, more cars rolled into the field. Mason spotted a large pickup backing toward the back acreage, right where his young tomato crop had just started to break soil. "Hey, stop that truck!" he shouted, breaking into a run. The driver hit the brakes just feet from the crop rows. "Sorry," he called out, rolling down the window. "Lady with the clipboard told me to park here." Mason turned around. Vanessa stood behind him, arms crossed. "You're making a scene," she said flatly. "This is the designated area. We have a community golf tournament. We need the space." "Says who?" Mason snapped. "Show me one legal document with my name on it that allows this." Vanessa's voice dropped an octave. "This community includes the mayor, 2 city councilmen, and Judge Wallace. Are you sure you want to make this into a legal issue? You might not like how that ends." Mason blinked. So that was the game. Leverage, pressure, bully tactics. He took a slow breath, then pulled out his phone. "You have 1 hour to remove every vehicle from my property," he said, loud enough for nearby neighbors to hear. "After that, I'm calling the sheriff, and towing, at your expense." Vanessa's lips curled into a snarl. "You wouldn't dare!" Mason raised his phone. "Watch me." At that moment, a sleek black SUV pulled up. Out stepped a man in a designer suit and sunglasses. "Jeffrey Sloan," he said smoothly, extending a hand. "HOA legal counsel. I'm sure we can resolve this peacefully." "No handshake today," Mason replied. "You're trespassing." "Well, according to HOA records, there's an easement." "Show me, right now." "Let's discuss it over coffee," Jeffrey smiled. Mason turned and walked away without another word. Inside, his hands shook as he called the county records office. He needed facts. He needed backup. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was war. By the time Mason pulled into the Clark County Records office, he was running on caffeine and pure adrenaline. The quiet building smelled like paper and old air conditioning, comforting in a strange way. Behind the desk sat a gray-haired clerk reading a paperback mystery. "I'm Mason Walker," he said breathlessly. "I need to check on any easements or agreements tied to the Walker Ranch outside Silver Pines Estates." The clerk perked up. Walker Ranch, huh? That land's got history. He extended a hand. Name's Raymond Cole. I knew your granddad, sharp as a whip, didn't take crap from anyone. Mason cracked a tired smile. Sounds about right. Raymond led him into a side room filled with metal filing cabinets and humming computers. After 20 minutes of searching, he laid out a series of documents. Let's start with this big one. There's no easement, parking or otherwise, ever recorded for your property, Raymond said. Which means what they're doing right now is straight-up trespassing. Mason exhaled hard, relief flooding through him. But then Raymond frowned and pulled out a yellowed envelope. This might be even more important. He opened it and laid out a map. A hand-drawn sketch of the ranch, dated 1991, with an official seal from Pine Ridge Electric. What's this? Mason asked. See this here? Raymond pointed to a small square in the northwest corner. That's the primary transformer for Silver Pines Estates. Mason squinted. Wait, that's on my land? Bingo. Raymond nodded. Your grandfather gave the electric company a utility easement to install that transformer, the one that powers the entire neighborhood. According to this document, access to it is granted under your family's terms. Mason blinked. Are you saying I control their electricity? In a manner of speaking, Raymond said with a smirk. They can't service or upgrade it without your permission, and moving it would cost a fortune. Mason stood motionless, mind racing. All this time, the HOA had parked on his field, mocked his property, and tried to strong-arm him. And yet, their entire electrical infrastructure depended on that single box on his land. How do I know they haven't tampered with it? Mason asked. Raymond shrugged. Might be worth a call to Pine Ridge Electric. They'll take it seriously. That transformer serves over 200 homes. 20 minutes later, Mason was on the phone with Ron Fletcher, operations manager at Pine Ridge. That's a serious safety issue, Ron said. No one but our certified techs should be near that station. I'll send someone to inspect it Monday morning. Mason hung up and stared through his windshield at his fields. The HOA thought they had him boxed in. But now, he was holding the switch. By Sunday morning, Mason was no longer reacting. He was strategizing. After leaving the records office with his grandfather's easement papers and confirmation that no parking rights had ever been granted, Mason spent the night assembling a war room right there in his dining room. He printed every legal document, highlighted boundary maps, took photos of tire damage, and labeled folders: trespassing, crop damage, easement rights, unauthorized access. Then he opened his laptop and created a digital backup of everything. If the HOA wanted to play dirty, he'd be 3 steps ahead. He wasn't just a stubborn landowner anymore. He was a man sitting on top of a critical piece of infrastructure, the electric lifeline to 200 homes, and they had no idea. He called Ron Fletcher at Pine Ridge Electric again. Ron, quick question. Who's allowed to authorize work on that transformer? Only the property owner, Ron replied. Unless there's a safety emergency, everything else requires written permission. Why? Because someone's been out there, Mason said. Fresh footprints. Access panel was open, and I didn't authorize anything. Ron swore quietly on the other end. That's a major violation. We'll send a tech first thing Monday. Can you secure it in the meantime? Already on it, Mason said. He had just ordered 4 wireless security cameras with motion alerts. He placed no trespassing private utility access signs near the transformer. He even spray-painted the easement boundary with bright red lines. Let them cross it now. Just before lunch, Mason saw a familiar face approaching the fence. Elena Carter, one of the few neighbors who had always been kind. Her golden retriever trotted beside her. Mason, she said hesitantly, I heard about what happened yesterday. He nodded. It's getting out of hand. She looked over her shoulder. Margaret's been sending HOA-wide emails saying you're threatening to shut off the power and destroy community unity. Mason laughed bitterly. Classic spin. She's also talking about fast-tracking an annexation vote, trying to absorb your ranch into Silver Pines legally. She can't, Mason replied. My property's zoned agricultural, not residential. She's trying to change that, Elena whispered. I saw an email chain where her husband, he works for a local zoning firm, offered to file a rezoning petition quietly. Mason's stomach dropped. Thanks for telling me. I don't want to see you bullied off your own land, she said. This place, it's part of what made Silver Pines feel real. As she walked away, Mason's phone buzzed with a text from Ron. We reviewed security footage near the transformer. A woman in a blazer tampered with the access panel. Police report filed. Mason stared at the message, heart pounding. Vanessa Hartley had just gone from nuisance to criminal trespasser. The game had officially changed. Mason no longer needed to prove who was right. Now, he just needed to let the facts speak for themselves. The following Monday, Mason waited on his porch, steaming mug in hand, as the Pine Ridge electric truck rolled up the gravel path. A tech named Dave stepped out, clipboard under one arm. We're here to inspect the transformer, he said, nodding politely, and file a report on the unauthorized access. Mason led him to the site. Dave took one look at the broken lock and shook his head. This wasn't weather. Someone pried this open with tools, probably bolt cutters. Dangerous move. Mason kept his face neutral. Any idea what they were trying to do? Dave shrugged. Maybe rigging a bypass, or just making it look like you were tampering. But they left fingerprints. We'll know more after forensics. By the time the inspection was done, Mason had what he needed: an official safety report, photographs, and a witness who saw that the property had been violated. Back at the house, his lawyer Oliver Jennings called. Good timing, Oliver said. I've got something juicy. Tell me. Turns out the HOA submitted forged zoning documents to the county last week, trying to annex your land under community development initiatives. They used a fake signature from your late grandfather to justify it. Mason gripped the phone tighter. You're sure it's forged? Without a doubt, Oliver said. We're filing for an emergency injunction to freeze any further actions. You've got enough now to shut this thing down. And then came the icing on the cake. That afternoon, Elena showed up again, this time with her tablet and a folder. I pulled every email I could find from the HOA list, she said, breathless. I think they're planning to present a fabricated easement agreement at tonight's board meeting. Mason scanned the email chain. Margaret, Jeffrey the lawyer, and a few other board members discussing escalating pressure, eliminating leverage, and rerouting the transformer infrastructure permanently. The implication was clear. They knew they were in the wrong. But instead of backing off, they were preparing a full-scale legal ambush. Are you willing to testify if this goes to court? Mason asked. Elena hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, enough is enough. By 4:00 p.m., Mason had assembled a legal package thicker than any HOA rulebook. His original deed, the transformer easement agreement, photos of crop damage and vehicle trespassing, the power company's safety report, screenshots of internal HOA emails, and now evidence of forgery and attempted land annexation. And one more thing. A flash drive containing footage from his newly installed security cameras. Tonight's emergency HOA meeting would be packed. Mason had already tipped off a local journalist. He wasn't just going to defend himself. He was going to expose everything. This wasn't just a neighborly dispute anymore. This was a case study in how arrogance falls when faced with truth, and a man who's got receipts, rights, and one powerful transformer on his side. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mason straightened his blazer in the mirror. He'd swapped his flannel and work boots for clean jeans, a crisp button-up, and a quiet confidence earned not from power, but from proof. Tonight wasn't about yelling or threats. It was about walking into a room full of people who'd been misled and giving them a reason to believe again. At 6:45 p.m., Mason walked into the Silver Pines Community Center, flash drive in one pocket, leather folder in the other. The meeting room buzzed with voices. Every folding chair was filled. HOA board members sat at a long table in front, with Vanessa Hartley, as usual, center stage in her signature red jacket and smug composure. When she spotted Mason, her smile dropped. He wasn't just the angry guy with a farm anymore. He looked ready to testify before Congress. Before Vanessa could begin the meeting, Thomas Reese, an older homeowner near the back, raised his hand. We want to hear what Mason has to say first. The crowd murmured in agreement. Vanessa scoffed. "This isn't public comment time." "I think it is now," Mason said calmly, walking to the projector. "And I think you'll all want to see this." He plugged in the flash drive and clicked to the first slide, a satellite image showing the transformer's location directly on his property. "This powers your homes," he began, "and it only exists because my grandfather allowed it. But lately, your board has been trespassing, damaging my fields and using forged documents to claim my land." Gasps echoed through the room. Mason clicked to the next slide, the forged easement agreement, complete with a signature dated 6 months ago. "My grandfather passed away 3 years ago," Mason said softly. "This is a felony." Vanessa shot to her feet. "This is slander! He's twisting facts!" But Mason didn't flinch. He clicked to the next slide. Emails between board members discussing how to fabricate legal pressure and reroute power. "You weren't trying to build a better community," he said. "You were trying to bully me into giving up my land. And you used your own neighbor's money to do it." People began to whisper. A woman in the 3rd row burst into tears. Thomas stood again. "Vanessa, is any of this true?" Her silence spoke volumes. Mason closed his folder. "I don't want control. I want respect. I want peace. But most of all, I want the truth to matter again." There was a beat of silence, and then, one by one, the room stood up and clapped. That night, Mason didn't just defend his farm. He proved that the quiet man who tends crops and minds his business can also be the one who brings down an empire of lies. 2 weeks later, the only thing louder than the spring bird song on Walker Ranch was the sound of silence from the HOA. No more SUVs parking in his east field. No more legal threats in his mailbox. No more smug smiles from Vanessa Hartley. Instead, Mason stood at the edge of his tomato rows, partially trampled but healing, and watched a half-dozen neighbors from Silver Pines carefully replacing damaged fencing. Volunteers, not because they had to, because they wanted to. Thomas Reese, now interim HOA president, walked up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We took a vote," he said. "Suspended Vanessa and the rest of the board. A full audit is underway, and we'd like to offer a formal apology." Mason blinked, caught off guard. "You don't owe me that." "We do," Thomas insisted. "We let arrogance get in the way of integrity. You reminded us that property lines aren't just legal, they're personal, and what we did was wrong." Mason extended his hand. "Let's just make sure it doesn't happen again." They shook on it, firm and honest. That night, the community gathered at the center, but not for a fight, for a barbecue. Children ran across the lawn with chalk in hand, drawing dragons and suns and stick figures on the pavement, things that once earned families fines. Ava Martinez, a young mom who'd once been cited for her patio plants, brought homemade lemonade. The Hendersons set up folding chairs and played bluegrass from a portable speaker. Someone had even brought Cooper, Mason's sheepdog, a chew toy. And Mason? He stood quietly near the back, sipping iced tea and watching neighbors laugh instead of whisper. One by one, people approached him, not with complaints, but thanks. "You reminded us that HOA rules don't override human decency," one said. "You showed us the truth can win without yelling," said another. Even Elena stopped by with a handwritten card. Inside it was a note. "Thanks for reminding us that farms grow more than food. Sometimes they grow justice, too." Later that week, the county issued a statement confirming the forgery charges against the old HOA board. Vanessa and her attorney faced legal action. Pine Ridge Electric doubled down on Mason's authority as sole easement holder. But for Mason, none of that mattered as much as what came next. He'd received a call from the State Agriculture Board asking if he'd consider speaking about rural property rights and utility easements. His quiet fight had gone viral after the news story broke, and now others were learning from his stand. Not bad for a guy who just wanted to plant tomatoes in peace. At the edge of his field, Mason knelt and ran his fingers through the soil. Where arrogance once left tire marks, hope was starting to grow again, and this time it wouldn't be uprooted. Power doesn't always come from a badge or a board seat. Sometimes it comes from standing your ground quietly, firmly, and with purpose. Mason Walker never set out to be a hero. He just wanted to protect the land his grandfather left him. But when rules were twisted into weapons and neighbors became pawns in a power game, he chose to act, not with vengeance, but with truth. His story reminds us that boundaries matter, not just the physical ones marked by fences, but the ethical ones. Lines between authority and abuse, between policy and principle. And when those lines are crossed, the most powerful response isn't shouting, it's showing up with evidence. It's saying no more. It's knowing your rights and using them wisely, because the people who make the biggest difference aren't always loud. Sometimes they're the ones quietly growing tomatoes, until someone tries to pave over them. If you live in a community with an HOA or similar authority, take time to read your rights. Know your property lines, your zoning classification, and any easements attached to your land. Keep records of communication, violations, and any damage. When facing pressure or harassment, stay calm and build your case. You don't need to escalate with emotion. You need to organize with facts. And never underestimate the power of local resources, county records offices, zoning boards, and yes, even neighbors willing to speak up. One voice with truth can challenge 1,000 with power.